The windscreen's now in place. It did take two people. I got on the inside and was able to position the screws and screw it in, and I had my son-in-law on the outside here pushing in. Now the hardest part, of course, is the centre of the screen. I positioned the top screws. Once I had the screen in the hole, just put them in loosely. But the bottom screws were, a long way out, and it takes an awful lot to push this in. Now, lucky my son-in-law's got big, strong hands, but even so, he really had to push hard in the centre to get the two centre screws in place. Now, we actually did it twice. I regard the first one as a practice, in hindsight, because what I did is I forgot to put these rubbers in. Now these rubbers here for the windscreen wipers, you can't get in after. Now, I assumed that when it was in place I'd be able to get those in, but you can't, because this windscreen seal actually goes halfway across the hole, which means you can't put that in. So I actually had to, after having installed it, undo it all, pull this out, put these in, and then recompress it. So anyway, just something you need to be aware of if you're putting it in. Now I've started to get in a bit, mount this in. It's not screwed in place yet. I just wanted to make sure everything would fit, and I also wanted to make certain of what I've got to have up in here. Now that does go in a little bit, it doesn't go all the way, and there's I noticed on one of the older pieces there's a bit of piping that goes in here, so I've actually got to make that so it'll actually fill in. Probably won't fill in all of the gap, but it'll fill in. I don't know how far that's going to compress in, but it'll fill in a fair bit of it, and if I make it wide enough, of course it'll fill in all of it. It's got a reasonable gap there. The piping that I saw was only fairly fine, which would mean that there would still be a gap, so I might just make the piping a little bit wider. I don't suppose it really, might need it. Just looks neater if it's a bit wider. Anyway, that's it's in place. I've tightened the screws up. I won't be installing it for the third time. Twice was enough. But that's how you do it. I've been refitting the doors. Put them all on initially just to make room in the workshop. Now I'm actually making the final adjustments to get everything right. Putting all the components back in, the windows and so on. Everything is working fine. There's no difficulty with any of that. The windows I've put, let's reach in here, put some new felts in. This is the felt, piped by the meter, and it just folds and goes into the channels. So it's not hard to install. A little bit of adhesive at the top to stop these ones from sliding down, but easy enough to fit in. So they're right. The lock was fine, just a few fine adjustments on the positioning of the this piece on the pillar here to make sure it locks properly, so that's all done. Put some sound deadening in the doors just to take the tinniness out of the closing. Now I'm attempting to put the front springs in. The first attempt didn't work, so I've decided to do it a different way. what I had originally was to clamp this with some spring clamps and compress it a bit and then put it in, but I found that it was awkward with the clamps because I was starting to foul the chassis when I jacked the spring up. So I'm now doing it without clamps and just doing it with a free spring. The first thing you need to do is to put these rubber pads on. Now I've glued a pad to the bottom, to the arm here, and I put the other pad on top of the spring, and I've put a bit of glue on that. Now if you don't do that, it's very hard to hold them in the position they need to be, as well as trying to fit the spring in the right position. It has to locate on a ring at the top up in here, and it's very difficult just to locate the spring without trying to have a piece of rubber floating around on top. So that's glued. I've got a pin, a very large bolt through the hole in the arm here, with a piece on the bottom there, so I can actually jack that up so this doesn't actually slide. So that's working well, that compresses okay. But the problem is locating the spring and making sure it, as I say, that it fits on the ring at the top. Now it's been sort of going off centre. So what I've done, I've turned the spring around. You'll note that the spring has or the end of the spring is flat. So I'll put the flat section out and just have the basic round coil at the back. So I'm hoping that will make it a bit easier to locate. So I've actually got to jack it up gradually and keep making sure it's in position. As I say, the first time it didn't, it went out of position, and I just had to undo it all again. So you've got to actually jack it up and then locate the other pin through the spherical bearing. So it's got to go up a fair way, and so not only you've got to locate the spring properly, but you've got to make sure it's coming up evenly so it can go through the spherical bearing. So there's a few things to do. I won't video the actual operation because it actually will take quite some time to gradually jack it up and reposition everything. But I'll just have a go at it now. Now I've just about got the spring locked up into place. The difficulty I had is that because I'm not pushing straight up on the spring, I'm actually using a lever, which is this along here, to push it up. It tends to bulge out, so it's bulging out this way, which is a natural thing when you try and compress a spring anyway. Now, as it was going up, I actually had to get this lever in behind here and push this part of the spring towards the centre of the car, because what it was doing was actually lifting off the retaining ring up in here. But it was easy enough, just a bit of pressure on that, it popped back into place. The other difficulty is because it's being compressed and swivelling around, it was tending to move away from the centre of the spherical bearing. So I've put this strap which goes along to the extra body mount on the chassis and put tension on that to actually pull this whole arm back towards the body of the car. In other words, making it more centralised. Once that was done, it was easy enough then to jack this up and line up the spherical bearing and the bolt. So that's all in. a little bit of trial and error, but it worked out well. One thing you need to be wary of though is when you compress a spring, there's an enormous amount of energy tied up in a compressed spring. You need to be extremely careful. If it lets go, you could be in all sorts of problems. I mean, I have had a spring let go years ago when I was compressing a spring in the XJ6 Jaguar. It let go and it flew across the garage floor. And because there's so much energy stored, if it hits you, it will shatter bones. So you need to be extremely careful. Take things very slowly, make sure things are properly braced. So, just don't take things for granted. Anyway, it's in. I've been locking up the various components and put the shock absorber arm on. I've got to put the top link on yet, but I need to work out the length of that. So that's just the next step. So it worked well. I can now move on to the other side and then finally get the springs back into place. I've now fitted up the spring on the other side. That worked quite well. No difficulties at all, particularly since I had the experience of doing the one on that side, so it's quite straightforward. Everything went up. I've still got to lock up a few things. I haven't locked these up because I intend to check the final adjustment once I've got the full front suspension in place. Got to lock up the rear pin here. So there's a few things I've got to do just to tie it up. What I'll do next, seeing I've got the springs in, I'll start looking at putting in the front steering rods and so on. So I've got to do all of that. I've got the steering box in place under those rags, but I need to tie up all the steering geometry, so that'll be the next thing to go on, which will help complete the front suspension.